7:10 on Breakfast. Compulsory fluoridation has been the subject of intense debate around the world. Prominent fluoride critic, retired Professor Paul Connett, is currently touring New Zealand. He's going to be presenting to MPs this evening and spreading his message that fluoride could do more harm than good. He's with us this morning. Tēnā koe, good morning.
Good morning, Jack.
From your perspective, why is fluoride harmful?
It damages the brain. A very rigorous study just published done by the government, US government-funded study, shows that pregnant women exposed to fluoride have produced offspring with lower IQ. And at the levels of exposure in New Zealand, we're talking about a loss of 6 IQ points. That's the bad news. The good news is there is better alternative. The real wave of the future is in Scotland with the Child Smile program. They're outdoing New Zealand on every statistic to do with teeth without water fluoridation. It's based upon education and diet, and in particular, educating the parents. The big scourge of tooth decay in young children is baby bottle tooth decay. And when you have access to the parents, when you educate not only the children when they first go to school, but have access to the parents as well, you can cut out this terrible tooth decay caused by babies sucking on sugared water, fruit juice, milk for hours on end. It rots the top teeth to the gum, leads to extractions under anaesthetic. We can cut that out with the Child Smile program.
Just go back to your first point. What was the study you told us about with the brain damage?
This was the Bosch Study published in September of 2017, US government-funded study, the National Institute of Health and other EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, a very rigorous study carried out by researchers that have done 50 papers between them on similar issues with lead and mercury. So they know what they're doing. Very rigorous study.
And what does it show in terms of the brain damage? Because I know that is a position of fluoride critics a lot of the time, is that fluoridation causes some sort of brain damage. I want to focus on the brain damage. Okay. How do we know that it causes brain damage?
Well, this study is the tip of the iceberg. We already had 51 out of 58 studies from around the world which showed that you get lower IQ when you compare villages with high fluoride versus low fluoride. The difference with this study, it was extremely rigorous, controlled for any confounder that you can think of. It was a 12-year study. It took us a little bit by surprise.
Why did it take you by surprise?
Well, because it was a government-funded study, and we're used to government-funded studies supporting government policy. As you know, fluoridation is the policy of countries like United States, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and so on. And when the government gets involved, they usually come back with studies which show that everything is honky-dory.
Is there more research in established and respected academic journals that support your position? Because certainly your opponents would say that this is wonky science.
Well, then they should read the literature. This is not wonky science. I challenge them to produce a significant number of studies that could negate these 52 IQ studies and can negate this study, this government-funded study.
Okay, the government funding is by the by, but I want to. What about the Dunedin multidisciplinary study? I mean, that is held up. That is a world-renowned study, held up for the quality of its data, the rigour of its analysis. What about that study?
You're talking about the Broadbent study. I'm sorry, this is not a good study. They hardly had any controls. 991 people. I mean,
with respect, Paul. I mean, the Dunedin study is held up as
by whom?
It is world renowned for the quality of its data. And here's what the Dunedin study found. I'm just trying to bring both sides of the argument here. The Dunedin study, and I'm going to quote the authors here, showed no significant differences in IQ by fluoride exposure, even before controlling for the other factors that might influence scores. And this is a quote from the lead author: "Our findings will hopefully help to put another nail in the coffin of the complete canard that fluoridating water is somehow harmful to children's development. In reality, the total opposite is true."
Yeah, well, Broadbent is a well-known promoter of fluoridation. The study was extremely weak. They hardly had any controls.
I don't think I've heard anyone say that about the Dunedin study ever.
It's public. If you read the journal where it was published, there are responses to explaining where it was so poor. There were 991 in the exposed and only 91 unexposed, and half of those had fluoride supplements. When you do the calculations, there was practically no difference in fluoride exposure.
Let's go off your research then. I'm considering some of the major research you have been quoting over the years, and I know the Harvard study was a significant one that fluoride critics have quoted on numerous occasions. That shows that the articles or the research considered in the Harvard study had massive deficiencies by the author's own admissions. That was taken from data collected in China in the 1970s. So what are we going to hold up in terms of rigour? The Dunedin study that is widely considered to be very, very accurate and to have rigorous scientific processes, or the kind of information that has come out of China and rural China in the 1970s?
Well, first of all, it was in the 1990s right up to the present. And secondly, all those quibbles go by the wayside when you compare it with this latest study by Bosch et al., researchers from many prominent universities, well-experienced, rigorous study. That is what you should compare with broadbent. And in fact, some of those Chinese studies in the meta-analysis from Harvard were very, very good studies. One in particular that I know very well, when you quantify the risk, it suggests that 1.5 milligrams of fluoride would lower a children's IQ by 5 IQ points. That is highly substantial. And I'm afraid that your Gluckman and Skegg, who reviewed this, made a huge error in analysing the meta-analysis. They said there was a drop of less than 1 IQ point in the meta-analysis. It was actually 7 IQ points.
All right, we could go on for a while. I know, Paul, I'm sorry, we've got to keep moving. But I know you represent the views of many people, and you'll be speaking with our parliamentarians later on this afternoon. That is Professor Paul Connett. It is obviously a contentious debate at the moment. About 50% of about 50% of New Zealanders, or just under 50% of New Zealanders, who are on mains water supply, so don't have the big tank out the back, all that sort of stuff. About 50% of them have their own are with water that has fluoridation.
I think it's up to the DHBs to decide.
Well, it's going to be up to. It could potentially soon be up to the DHBs to decide. I think to this point it's been up to the councils, but there's a movement to try and get the DHBs involved. But certainly, I mean, it's
interesting points he brings up. I mean, this study actually, because you sort of expect anti-fluoride activists to be sort of, it's going to damage the pineal gland and your third eye, etc. Yeah. But I mean, he came up with some really interesting facts, and there's some data that's saying it's actually lowering children's IQ.
I just think you have to take you have to take all of that information, from both sides, in the full context of everything. And I just think it's curious that the Centre for Disease Control, the American Medical Association, the American Dental Association, and the World Health Organization all say there's absolutely no research whatsoever that fluoridation causes that fluoridation in small levels causes damage to New Zealanders, causes damage to people who are drinking fluoridated water. In the interest of fairness and balance for the other side of the debate, we are joined by former Health Minister Jonathan Coleman. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Jack.
You heard that. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I disagree with Dr. Connett. I mean, the fact is, all the evidence is in favour of fluoridation, and we can make a huge difference in New Zealand if we get the water supply fluoridated. 35,000 New Zealand kids under 4 have a tooth pulled out each year. As Dr. Connett alluded to, Sir Peter Gluckman and Sir David Skegg reviewed all the information, all the studies over time, and they found there is no harm from fluoride in the water at the levels in New Zealand, and it would have a huge benefit for the dental health of New Zealanders.
What about this recent study that the retired professor was quoting?
Well, look, you can argue over the detail and the methodology, but when you lift it up to a view of all the research that is available, the WHO, Centre for Disease Control, NZMA, the New Zealand Dental Association, they all support fluoridation of water. It's totally safe. And look, the WHO has said that fluoridation is one of the single biggest achievements in public health of the 20th century. I totally support it. The Prime Minister, actually, who I know does support it, but needs to show some leadership on this and come out and say, actually, the New Zealand government backs fluoridation in water, and it's something that absolutely needs to happen here.
So you would like to see it mandated across the country?
Well, the legislation which the government I was part of introduced handed the decision-making over to DHBs, so district health boards, because they have the health expertise. That bill is now at
why doesn't the government do it? Why didn't you just back the whole government to do it?
Because it's a controversial issue that there's a wide range of public opinion on, so it was felt it was better to have some local democracy in this. But I can tell you, I totally back fluoridation. It should happen.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. That's the former Health Minister, Jonathan Coleman. We've also gone to the current Health Minister, David Clark. He wasn't available for an interview this morning, but Jacinda Ardern says regarding the retired professor's presentation to MPs this afternoon, it does not change our view, and Health Select Committee has also provided access to those groups to share their view. It does not mean we've changed our position on fluoridation. It's just about letting people have their say, regardless of whether we agree with them or not.
Still to come, do you know how to drive a manual, and do you actually